Folklore is packed with omens of coming disaster. Across the West, the black cat is a harbinger of doom. If one crosses your path, it is believed to be an omen of bad luck and misfortune. In China, the number 4 is considered extremely unlucky due to it sounding similar to the word for death. In Mexico, it is thought that sighting a mariposa de muerte in one's home warns that someone who is ill is about to pass away. With that in mind, here are 5 cases of paranormal entities which have supposedly foreshadowed the coming of disaster. On the 30th of September 1911, the Austin Dam in Potter County, Pennsylvania failed. Completed in the December of 1909, the dam had been built to help fuel the Baylis Pulp and Paper Company mill in the town. However, the owner's insistence that the builder cut costs, leading to dramatic reductions in the depth and width of the dam's walls and foundations, meant that the structure's failure was inevitable. When the dam collapsed less than 2 years later, the tragedy caused mass destruction in the valley below and cost the lives of at least 78 people. Yet, there have been suggestions that such a high death toll could have been prevented. The solution, it was claimed, lay with a mysterious figure who stalked the town's railroad yard months before the September disaster. This spook was described 1 year later in a local newspaper. Just a month after the dam's completion, in January 1910, snowmelt and heavy rains caused a portion of the dam to slide downstream by about 31 inches. Vertical cracks formed and buckled part of the dam, resulting in a minor flood. Local residents fled for the higher grounds of the hills, terrified that the entire structure would break at any moment. The dam managed to hold that time. Once the water receded, the townspeople returned, shaken but safe for now. The newspaper stated that it was around the time of this minor flood that the citizenry of Austin had another scare. Rumors circulated the town that a ghost had appeared in the days before, seemingly acting as an omen of the coming flood. According to the report, the strange visitor was a very tall man-ghost dressed in black. He was described as riding and crawling between the railroad's cars, appearing and disappearing mysteriously. The spooky entity was not reported to have spoken to any residents, with the men working on the railroad too uneasy or scared to dare approach. After the flood in January, the giant dressed in black disappeared, causing many to suspect that he was somehow connected with the flood. When the dam failed entirely the following year, residents almost entirely forgot about the strange figure in black, too shocked and too busy trying to re-establish their lives to dwell on it. It wasn't until the calamity's first anniversary that local people, including a gentleman described as one of the many heroes of the disaster, brought this chilling tale to the attention of local news outlets. Who was the very tall man dressed in black who visited Pennsylvania in 1910? Was he a spirit of the dead, there to warn others lest they meet the same fate as him? Or was he some other paranormal entity with an unnatural knowledge of the coming disaster? Unfortunately, as suddenly and mysteriously as he appeared, the story of the strange man in black faded away, lost to the pages of history. In Detroit, there is said to exist a creature which presages misfortune. This harbinger of doom is known as the Nain Rouge, the Red Dwarf. A book published in 1883 described the creature as being very red in the face with a bright glistening eye, as well as a grinning mouth displaying sharp pointed teeth. Whilst various origin stories of the Nain Rouge exist, the most commonly told dates back to 1701, when Antoine de la Mothe Cadillac founded Detroit. According to this tale, the Frenchman was warned by a fortune teller to be more careful with his money, and when the time came, to appease the Nain Rouge, or face ruin. Sometime later, whilst walking home from a May Day celebration with his wife, Cadillac encountered the foretold dwarf. Arrogant and full of anger, he smacked the Nain Rouge with his cane and shouted, "Get out of my way, you red imp." The Nain's response was to laugh and curse the hot-tempered Frenchman and the city which he had founded. Exactly as the fortune teller had warned, Cadillac's fortunes fell. He was arrested for abuse of authority and was forced to leave Detroit. A brief stint as governor of Louisiana also ended badly. He eventually returned to France, where he was imprisoned in the Bastille for 5 months. Haunted by bad luck and financially ruined, Cadillac died in disgrace. Since then, the Nain Rouge is said to have appeared before incidents of bloodshed and disaster connected with Detroit. According to legend, the sharp-toothed creature was sighted right before 1763's Battle of Bloody Run, where many soldiers were killed in a thwarted surprise attack against Chief Pontiac. The Nain Rouge was also said to have manifested before the Great Fire of 1805, a blaze which saw all 200 structures in Detroit except a stone warehouse burn to the ground. In modern times, an annual parade called the Marche du Nain Rouge is held in Detroit. As recently as 1976, 2 utility workers spotted what they thought was a child climbing a utility pole before a particularly brutal snowstorm crippled the city. Afterwards, it was described as the most recent Nain Rouge sighting. Far from forgotten and consigned to folklore, the Red Dwarf is very much a part of the city's identity, for better or for worse. There exists an old maritime legend that tells of a ghost ship that is said to be cursed to sail the seas forever, never to make port again. An omen of doom, it foreshadows disaster for any and all who see it. This legendary vessel is called the Flying Dutchman. The oldest known print reference to the phantom ship can be found in Travels in various parts of Europe, Asia and Africa, which was published in 1790 by John MacDonald. In one of the chapters, MacDonald describes sailing around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa when his ship ran into bad weather. One of our best seamen was easing himself on the head, and the sea washed him away. He called out, a rope, captain," but he disappeared and was never seen afterwards. The weather was so stormy that the sailors said that they saw the Flying Dutchman. The common story is that this Dutchman came to the Cape in distress of weather and wanted to get into harbour, but could not get a pilot to conduct her and was lost, and that ever since, in very bad weather, her vision appears. Literary references to the notorious ship continued throughout the end of the 1700s and into the 19th and 20th centuries. An otherworldly glowing light was said to accompany the vessel, yet, above all, it was said that the ship's appearance predicted disasters. The worst omen of all for a sailor, it was said that those who see the Flying Dutchman are doomed to meet a terrible fate. John Leyden, a Scottish Orientalist writing in the 19th century, described how the Flying Dutchman was a common superstition amongst mariners. He wrote about alleged encounters which seemed to confirm MacDonald's earlier report. The spectral ship was most frequently spotted off the coast of South Africa. Hurricanes there are frequently ushered in by the appearance of a spectre ship, denominated as the Flying Dutchman. At the dead of night, the luminous form of a ship glides rapidly, with topsails flying, and sailing straight in the wind's eye. The crew of this vessel are supposed to have been guilty of some dreadful crime in the infancy of navigation, and to have been stricken with the pestilence. They were hence refused admittance into every port, and are ordained still to traverse the ocean on which they perished, till the period of their penance expires. Far from being spotted by lone witnesses, the Flying Dutchman is often seen by many sailors at the same time. On the 11th of July 1881 at 4 AM off the coast of Australia, Prince George of Wales, the future King George V of the United Kingdom, reported encountering the ship. as well as the Prince's 13 crew members on board HMS Inconstant, attested to witnessing a strange red light come out of the pre-dawn darkness. The Prince's log described how a great ship suddenly came up on the port bow, where also the officer of the watch from the bridge clearly saw her. After it passed, no sign whatever of any material ship was to be seen either near or right away to the horizon, the night being clear and the sea calm. Later that day, at 10:45 a.m, the seaman who first reported the Flying Dutchman fell from the foretopmast to his death. As in all reported cases, sighting the Flying Dutchman foreshadowed catastrophe. America has a long history with sightings of winged humanoid creatures. In 1877, newspapers reported that one such monster was frequenting Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York, performing aerial acrobatics for an astonished audience. These incredible sightings continued until 1880. In 1897, more than 100 people in Mount Vernon, Illinois, including the local mayor, clearly witnessed a humanoid figure flying through the air. Some have attributed these bizarre sightings to eccentric inventors attempting flight with homemade contraptions. However, since the first human-powered flight was achieved many decades later, in 1961 by Derek Piggott, it is doubtful that there would have been so many unknown successes in a time when the first functional aircraft had yet to be invented. These inexplicable sightings of winged humanoids continued into the 20th century, but on the 15th of November 1966, what had up until then been curious phenomena took on a sinister turn. On that night, two young couples from Point Pleasant, West Virginia, were driving around the so-called TNT area, thus named due to the area having served to manufacture arms in World War II. They had parked near an old generator plant when they alleged to have witnessed a huge flying man that was approximately 7 feet tall, with large 10-foot wings on its back and two enormous red eyes that had a reflective quality to them. The four stated that they were then pursued by what they originally thought was an animal, which managed to keep pace with them even as their car sped away at 100 miles an hour. When they reported this to the police, an officer accompanied them to investigate the location. The officer did not find any creature or winged man, but his police radio did receive a strange transmission at the location, which, in his testimony, was described as sounding like a tape recording being played at very high speed. The next morning, the police relayed the incident to the newspapers, who in turn dubbed the creature the Mothman. Within 3 days, 8 people came forward reporting various similar creatures. Over the next year, this grew to hundreds, with local reports claiming that the Mothman would occasionally screech as it flew overhead. A local news reporter stated that they had received over 500 phone calls relating to the Mothman between 1966 and December 1967. In particular, many witnesses attested to seeing the Mothman on the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant to the state of Ohio. Reported in December 1967, the sightings lasted for many days. No one knew why it had chosen that particular spot. But when the bridge collapsed only a few days later, on the 15th of December, the Mothman was declared an omen of the deaths of those 46 who had died in the accident. Writing in 1975, John Keel describes interviewing over 100 witnesses of the Mothman. Many of these people told of experiencing vivid nightmares, as well as strange telephonic disturbances leading up to the collapse of the bridge. One person who suffered from terrible bad dreams was a Mrs. Thomas. She described to Keel how, in her nightmare, there were a lot of people drowning in the river and Christmas packages were floating everywhere in the water. Mothman sightings greatly decreased after the disaster. This only cemented the belief that the strange winged creature was somehow connected with the tragedy. Extraordinarily, it has been alleged that the Mothman did not serve just the residents around the Silver Bridge as a terrifying presager of doom. According to many accounts, this strange paranormal entity has been present before some of the worst disasters that have occurred in living memory. If one looks globally, it could be said that the Mothman is related to mass sightings of a man-dragon in China, which occurred before a deadly dam disaster in 1926. Many decades later, a similarly described winged entity was supposedly sighted in Mexico before the outbreak of swine flu. Described as a man-bat with glowing red eyes, the Mexican Mothman bears striking similarities to early reports of the chupacabra, leading one to question just how widespread Mothman sightings are. It cannot be denied that the mystery of the Mothman is global and persists into the present day. Whether it is a case of post-event fabrication or an actual paranormal entity with powers of premonition, however, is up for debate. The Mothe coal mine at Port Talbot in South Wales was operational from the mid-1800s until 1913, eventually closing after a long history of accidents. In 1863, 30 workers died there in an explosion. In 1870, another 38 lost their lives. Yet, it was the disaster of Monday the 10th of March 1890 which haunted the minds of the local community for many years to come. Just after midday, when about 250 men were working below the ground, a violent explosion shook the mine. Those close to the surface were knocked back by a very strong gust of wind, their tongues and lips swollen by the sulfuric afterdamp of the blast. Those working deeper in the pit were instantly entombed. Days of excavation work to rescue survivors and retrieve bodies commenced, with the 2 rescue parties suffering casualties in the process. Eventually, as subterranean fires raged and conditions became increasingly more dangerous, the mission was abandoned and the mine flooded. In total, 87 lives were lost in the accident, with many of the bodies unable to be recovered. The loss of life was great, tragically creating 68 widows and 178 fatherless children. However, in the days that followed the explosion, there were whispers of thanks that the number who had perished had not been greater. Usually, some 420 men were employed in the mine, but on that Monday, many had chosen to stay away because of, it was said, fear that something terrible was about to occur. It was rumoured that the mine was haunted. One tale told by those who worked at the mine was of a man who jumped on a journey of trams underground, and after riding some distance, jumped off and melted away into the darkness of the mine. The man was recognised as one who had died long ago. He was said to be a ghost. Philip Williams, a survivor of the accident, described to the local newspaper a couple of days after the explosion how he had encountered another ghost dressed in oilskin in the mine. Extraordinarily, it had accompanied him as he was coming up in the cage. It was also said that a peculiar red dog appeared at the mine some time before, seemingly acting as a dark omen of what was to come. It daily made its appearance in one of the working places, and then, just as mysteriously, disappeared. Despite suggestions that it may have been a living dog, those who encountered it were adamant that it was not of this earth. It was a ghostly dog, and an omen of evil. Strange noises were also said to be commonplace in the 2 weeks before the explosion. In particular, in a part of the pit known as the 9 feet deep, trams had been heard dashing down the incline, and falls seemed to be taking place. When, however, the area was examined, all was found to be in order. On another occasion, 14 days before the accident, 2 men working in the pit were left shaken when the door above them clapped shut, seemingly of its own accord. No one had been sent there that day, and neither of the 2 could understand it. One miner is said to have been so frightened by inexplicable noises that 3 weeks before the explosion, he refused to go underground again, saying that he heard similar noises when the explosion of 1870 occurred. The strange sounds led him to believe that a similar disaster could not be far off again, a presentience which was tragically proven to be correct. The frequency of reports of uncanny sounds and flesh-creeping premonitions even inspired some men to leave the mine altogether. Isaac Hopkins, the manager of another coal mine in the area, disclosed to the local newspaper that a number of his men had come to work at his mine from Mothe, stating that they had left their old job because the pit was dreadfully haunted. Amongst those who remained at the mine, supernatural fears prevailed so strongly that, during an inquiry into the accident the following month, it was revealed that a special examination had been made of the mine only a few days before the explosion. The reasons for the examination were the persistent complaints of spirits in the pit. The men hoped that a special examination would get rid of them. Nothing untoward was found during the examination. In fact, the mine at Mothe had a reputation for stringent safety checks by the standard of the times. Foremen frequently searched the mine for dangerous levels of gas. David Aubrey, a fireman, said that he went into the pit on the 9th of March, the evening preceding the explosion. During his 2-hour examination, he found no gas, fog, nor any indication of danger. Later inquiries into the accident struggled to decide on an explanation as to what had caused the explosion that day. Eventually, it was concluded that it was most likely shot firing, carried out in accordance with current regulations, that had been responsible for the explosion. Tales told by survivors and those who had left the mine argued that, whatever the cause, the explosion had been presaged, with warnings sent by unseen paranormal forces. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please consider sharing on social media and subscribing for more of the paranormal. I'd also like to say a big thank you to those of you who support us on Patreon. Finally, remember, if you cannot wait until my next upload, you can always watch another, so why not check out one of the videos suggested on screen now. Until next time.